Welcome back, everybody. We're going to get started with the second half of our program. This section is going to be on public engagement by map drawers, reaching out to the communities around Virginia and whatever state the speaker is in as well. The speakers this section are going to be Chris DeRosa. She's going to talk about, she's just going to give an overview of the public engagement requirements under the new reforms in Virginia. Chris is based in Arlington, and in addition to being the League of Women Voters of Virginia Redistricting Committee co-chair, she's also a board member for One Virginia 2021, and her grassroots leadership have been instrumental in passing the reforms in Virginia. Nancy Wang is she's the executive director and founding member of Voters Not Politicians. She's going to be talking to us about best practices for community engagement. Voters Not Politicians is a nonpartisan grassroots group that led the successful 2018 campaign to end partisan gerrymandering in Virginia, and in Michigan. She's an attorney, and she also led the volunteer policy committee that wrote the amendment in Michigan, and that amendment established the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. And just last night, that commission held its first public hearing in the state's first ever citizen-led redistricting cycle. So that's very exciting. And then our third speaker in this section will be Moon Duchin. She's the director of the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group at Tufts University. And she's going to be talking about tips for processing public input. She's an associate professor of mathematics at Tufts. Her applied research program is in data science for civil rights, and the MGGG Redistricting Lab has become a leading group in the national efforts to better understand census, redistricting, and electoral systems. So Chris, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate today. And let's see if I can get this going. Okay, so I am with the League of Women Voters, and I've been asked to give you an overview of the requirements for citizen engagement. Move that down. And for pretty much 400 years, redistricting has been done behind closed doors by a small group of politicians with limited input from the public. But Virginia is now bringing map drawing into the sunlight. Back in November, 2/3 of the voters approved Constitutional Amendment number 1. And now Virginia has a balanced, bipartisan, citizen-led redistricting commission. So that constitutional amendment altered the way that redistricting is being done in Virginia starting this year. One of the requirements in the Constitution now states that there shall be at least 3 public hearings in different parts of the Commonwealth. And all records and documents of the commission shall be considered public information. So those are 2 requirements that are in the Constitution. In addition, the General Assembly amended the Code of Virginia when it passed 2 identical bills in 2020, SB 717 and HB 1255. And so we'll take a look at what those requirements are. And again, these are in the Code of Virginia. So it states there that all meetings and hearings shall be adequately advertised. They shall be planned to ensure the public is able to attend and participate fully in those meetings. And they shall be advertised in multiple languages as practicable and appropriate. Before drawing or voting on the maps, the commission shall hold at least 3 public hearings. So this matches what's in the Constitution. Public hearings may be held virtually, and any public hearings that are held in person shall be conducted in different parts of the Commonwealth. The commission is also directed to establish and maintain a website and to receive comments and proposals by citizens. Furthermore, all data that the commission receives shall be placed on the website within 3 days of its receipt. That would include census data, precinct maps, election results, and shapefiles. And if, as you may or may not know, if the Commission and the General Assembly fails in 2 attempts to come out with a set of maps, then the Supreme Court of Virginia has the responsibility for drawing the maps. They shall appoint 2 special masters to do the actual drawing. But in the code, it also now calls for public participation in the court's redistricting deliberation. That might include briefings, written submissions, hearings in open court, and any other means. So the door has opened. Virginia voters should use this unique opportunity to participate in the redistricting process. The League certainly supports this, and we hope that you will engage with us. As President Deb Wake said, we are closely watching the process and would like you to join us. And as Suzanne and others said, it's important for the citizens to engage, including in identifying your communities of interest. The League has done many trainings on this. It's available on our website, LWV-VA.org. And you can follow us with the blog. We try to update our information for you. So thanks very much.
Great, Chris. Thank you so much for giving us that overview. It'll be a great foundation for the rest of the conversation. Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm also going to try to share my screen. Oops, this is, sorry. Go. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Like Liz said, yesterday was a really historic day for us in Michigan. We had our first ever redistricting public hearing. To the left on this slide, you'll see the commissioners. And it being, of course, COVID time, there are a lot of questions all the way up until recent weeks about how the commission was going to do its hearings, whether it was going to be in person. And they did go ahead and they did a great job of making sure that there was safe distancing, but a lot of people really did want to come and speak in person. We had 150 participants, including 71 citizens that gave public comment. 69 of those were in person and 2 over Zoom. And so it really was a resounding success. And, speaker after speaker they were just speaking about, why they were there, why this citizen-led commission was so important, and, such a fresh start for the state of Michigan. And it was exactly what we as, an education and outreach organization really had hoped it would be. This, being the first Michigan Citizens Redistricting Commission ever, all along the way, it's always been a question of, us and we and other nonprofit, nonpartisan groups are really trying to get the word out. But of course, you don't know, the impact you're going to have until things like this happen. So our first test was, getting people to apply for the commission. I think our, internal goal was something like 5,000 applicants, and we saw in the state over 9,300 applicants. So that was a big success. And here for the community mapping phase, our internal goal is to see 300 submissions from citizens of the state of Michigan. And I think last night, with 150 participants is really, shows that we're off to a great start. So community engagement, what VMP is doing, and I'll say that, all of this, what we are doing is really informed by all of the great advice we've been getting from the California commissioners, including, Jean and Gil and Andre, who are here with us today. Also Arizona redistricting commissioners and Kathy Fung of Common Cause, Michael Brennan of Michael Lee of the Brennan Center. So, we really are grateful. Again, this being our first time, to have the benefit of, that great experience to guide us. So what we do is, we basically have split up our community engagement into 2 different sort of programs. One is what we call a deep engagement program. There we've chosen 10 community partners. We've been able to, fundraise and give them subgrants because we know that this is going to, this is a process that's going to take place over the next year. It does take a lot of resources, from their staff, and we want to support that. So we have 10 community organizations that we've been working with, and deep engagement for us just means we've been there every step of the way. We, developed a curriculum with, these groups' input. We give presentations, and we sort of co-host these presentations to their membership with, a leader of the community group. We do multiple workshops with their members on, with the mapping software, and we sort of iterate, given what we see at the community hearings, public hearings, sort of, what approach they're going to take, and what, we all collectively, think is sort of their best, strategy for making their voices heard. So like it's, called, it really is sort of a deeper engagement. But then also recognizing, and our hope, of course, is to get as broad involvement as possible across the state. And so we, we have made a digital toolkit available with messaging and kind of informational literature that any group can take and disseminate. And we do give town halls as well to any group that requested, about where we kind of lay out the whole redistricting process, and just kind of go over in general terms what the community can do, why it matters, and and what now that our commission has a portal where you can submit your own comments, and we try to spread the word about that. So with our presentations, we basically cover why does redistricting matter, right? That of course is like a key point we need to get across, which is, this is worth your time, and it's worth your investment. It matters to you, it affects your life. And of course, with that, in that area, we have to provide as many details as possible. And I'll get to that in a minute. And then we cover, what will this redistricting commission do? Because we, of course, have been involved intimately for years, but, it's brand new, and, we need to provide overview to, again, as many citizens as possible about what this commission is and what its job is. And, to hit home the fact that its job really is to learn from community members about where our communities are, because then it needs to draw maps that keep our communities together. And it needs to make that piece, the core, the center of its work. And then we talk to community members about, well, what does that mean, right? So when you're advocating for a community, how do you figure out, what the boundaries of a community, are? How do you make choices about which community you're going to advocate for? And then we talk about, a little bit of the nuts and bolts, which I know that, other presenters will get to, where we just, we talk about, well, here are the mechanics of how you navigate the public comment process here in Michigan. So, why should communities get involved? Again, this is really about, better representation, elected officials who care about your interests. Michigan being historically extremely gerrymandered, we have politicians that are insulated and really have not been serving our interest for forever. So this really is a chance for us to get representation and hold our politicians accountable. And then, better government programs. And then we kind of try to drill down to the policy issues that, people can relate to. So in Michigan here, it's air and water quality, especially, Great Lakes. We have a lot of PFAS, like underground contamination. Funding for schools, public school funding is a really big challenge here in Michigan. Mass transportation and quality of roads. Our infrastructure is really crumbling. So we point out that, if you care about these issues, and in particular, there's some communities where they particularly have, issues with mass transit or infrastructure, then these are the issues that you really want representation for. And then this being a key part, again, for our deep engagement partners, we really co-host our presentations with leaders of the group in order, again, to, of course, it's personal, right? Like why you would want to get involved is personal to every member of that group. And so this is a way to, to really engage in a way that is tailored to the group, of course, that we're talking with. And two of our partners, deep engagement partners, are Oakland Forward, located in Pontiac, and APIA Vote. And we're really grateful for that partnership, and it's been working very, very well. And then we go over, and I'll just kind of go through this very quickly. What will the Redistricting Commission actually do? Very similar to, the Virginia Commission, which is, it has to gather community input, right? To understand, well, where are the community boundaries? And it has to do that by receiving, testimony and maps at these public hearings. So our commission has scheduled 16 public hearings throughout the state. You can see the map, and they were geographically dispersed. And there was a bunch of public comment actually, from groups that to make sure that these were actually, in geographically across the state, so everyone could get a chance to make their voices heard. And so, we publicize the dates and stuff about that. And then, we talk about, well, why are we concentrating on communities of interest? And of course, like Virginia, there is a requirement that our maps take into account the diversity of our state. And so this is just a little bit. So again, to sort of facilitate these conversations, we've been just starting from really, the very basics of like, where do you and your neighbors work? Where do you shop? Some economic interests that you can think about. Again, these are kind of facilitated conversations just to get people, kind of thinking through again and try to sort through what communities they're members of that they really want to advocate for, recognizing, of course, that, people are members of multiple communities. And the interests of each of them might align, but they might not. And then we have breakout sessions, being the time of COVID, where we have to have had to be a little bit creative. And these breakout sessions actually have worked really well. They're more intimate. People can just kind of like, especially in the beginning, just kind of free for all sort of, kind of free form discussions. And then more recently, they've been, as we've kind of come to consensus around, the general communities that we're talking about, they've been kind of drilling down into, more about exactly what, the boundaries that they're advocating for and why. And then, of course, our main goal is to get people to actually participate. And we go through, like I said, the mechanics of how to do that. So like, One Virginia, we teach people how to use representable. We also have a paper and pencil form. And so our message throughout is just, to make this as accessible and inclusive as possible. Knowing that really is going to be like one of the biggest barriers, right, to people participating, is they think, well, it's really complex and technical, and there's a lot of experts involved. But really, our message throughout is just this is the stuff that the commission needs to draw its maps around. It can't draw the maps around our communities because it doesn't know what our community boundaries are. So whatever form that takes, of your input, just do it. Right? It could be, on the back of a napkin. It could be hopefully through the portal and, through a map that they can directly incorporate into Maptitude or whatever they're using. But regardless of what it is, it's their input that matters the most. So, not to get caught up in the fact that it has to be perfect or in a certain way, but just to jump in and attend one of these public hearings, submit your maps, and again, just making sure that everyone knows that they are the key to making all of this work. So thank you so much.
Nancy, thank you. That was fantastic, and I think really helpful to all of us, to those of us working on the outside, to engage with the community and with all communities and get their voices heard. And I think also to the commissioners who are going to be receiving all of that, hopefully ample amounts of input. Nancy, this looks like it's going to be mostly for you. Apart from attending commission hearings and providing testimony, what else can folks do to weigh in and be heard by the commission?
Yeah, so, one of the things that we're trying to, make known is the fact that even with 150 people at our first public hearing, we really need to spread the word. So our commission, like every other government agency, has a limited budget for promotion. And so what we're asking people to do is to engage in one of these presentations. Of course, not just, given by us, but also a lot of our, nonpartisan partners like the League of Women Voters of Michigan and other groups to learn about the process, and then become basically an ambassador to tell people, hey, this is happening. It matters. This is what we all voted for. And then also, Yeah, so just to encourage people, to get engaged. So our volunteers, VNP, we still are mostly a volunteer kind of led organization, and we've been encouraging our volunteers to write letters to the editor, which they've done, and help spread the word as much as they can.
Excellent. Thank you. That's so helpful. And now we're going to hand it over to Moon Duchin to talk about some tips for processing all of this tons of public information that's going to come in.
Great. Hi. Sorry, I am just parachuting in the middle of what I'm sure has been a really great day. I just started my students off on their final exam for my voting theory class, which is my last class of the semester. So I'm very excited about that. Okay, so my name is Moon Duchin. I'm a math professor at Tufts, hence the voting theory class. And I run a lab that does a lot of work with trying to support public input, trying to support commissions and legislatures and other kinds of line drawing bodies and folks who are in favor of transparency everywhere. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it might look like to, once you've started to receive public input, what it might look like to take it into account. So I'm going to keep my remarks pretty brief and maybe also show you what a portal looks like, because we just put one up for Michigan's commission 1 week ago today. So the basic premise for me is that if you take a look at several past cycles, what you see is that an enormous number of states, nearly all, have a kind of official public input process, at least nominally. But what that can look like has varied a great deal. And in particular, the criterion to respect communities of interest, which is something that's recognized officially in more than 30 states, has been especially nebulous, even in the world of redistricting, where a lot of the criteria are somewhat vague and sometimes in tension. So as I see it, that problem has been one of translating between the kind of things people say when they come to a microphone at a public hearing and visualizable, actionable data that can be put in front of line drawers and a notion of what it might mean to take that into account, right? And so that's the gap that that my lab and lots of other groups around the country have been really putting some thought into how to use technology to bridge. COVID, of course, has been an enormously disruptive experience for the nation and the world in the last year. But one thing that it's done is it's scrambled our notions of how to hear from the public. So whereas literally coming to a mic in a room and presenting your input out loud was certainly the model in the past, things were already turning in a computer direction, and COVID, of course, only hastens that, right? And in a way, there's an opportunity there for technology to help mediate that gap between what people have to say and putting things in a form that can be where a line drawing body can be held to account. Okay, so let me share my screen for a quick moment and just give you a look at one possible way to think about bridging the gap. So this michiganmapping.org is the public comment portal that just went up, as I mentioned a week ago, for the state of Michigan. So I present this as just one case study of what it might look like to try to use public input and to sort of render it in a data ready form. So here you see the ability to submit public testimony, a districting plan, or a community of interest, a form for doing that, and some videos that show you kind of what it might mean. But importantly, here's the submission gallery of input that the public has submitted. And in the 1 week since this portal went live, there have been over 120, I think getting up to nearly 150 submissions from the public. And those submissions in some cases are in testimony form, just the same thing that someone might have said if they came to the mic in a hearing. But here's something that's relatively new, the ability to draw and to sort of connect your testimony to something mappable. So as you see, some folks here have done that in the form of drawing districts, and others have done that in the form of drawing their communities. And when they do so, they have an opportunity, I'm clicking over to a detail page, they have the opportunity to draw their community, but to also explain what it is that makes it a community. Explain, in other words, what the representational needs are, or what folks have in common in a particular area that they want the line drawers to know about when they draw. Okay, so that's just a little bit about what it might look like to offer an interface that's relatively easy for folks to use in a scattered and dispersed way, to say what they want to say about who they are and how they want to be represented. So I'll stop the screen share and just talk a little bit about, you know, once you collect the data, then what? So if all goes, so 10 years ago, for instance, the state of Utah set up a website to collect mapping input. And they called it redistrictutah.com. And if I remember the numbers right, they got somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 valid plans submitted through that interface. And then once they got those, they reviewed them and thought about whether any of them might guide their decision. And, you know, what, it's a legislature driven process in Utah. So what happened next happened behind closed doors. This time around, if with any luck, states will be getting not hundreds, but thousands of different submissions. And some of those will be in the form of COIs, or communities of interest, as well as in the form of districting plans. So it becomes important in order, you know, there is such a thing as too much data, right? It becomes important in order to make that usable, to think about how to aggregate and synthesize it. And so there, I would also say that our group and plenty of other groups around the country are doing some good thinking about what it looks like to cluster the data and to figure out what kinds of narrative input are coming from what parts of the state, right? So at the end of the day, you need two things. You need the ability to take the information that people are telling you and see it in a form that you know will be able to use, but it helps to also have a data team that can help you aggregate and look for themes and try to understand whether something is a repeated interest that's being articulated by different kinds of citizens around the state. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about what that might look like, but I wanted to start with just a very zoomed out big picture overview of some of the efforts for what you might do if you wanted to take that community of interest and that public input and sort of do them in a modern 2021 way. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Moon. Thank you for parachuting in. It was wonderful. So I think we are, yes, we're at the Q&A segment for Chris, Nancy, and Moon. And we have a question for Nancy already. Nancy, can you talk about how you selected and researched the partners that you are digging in with? How did you learn about those communities who are often left out of the process? And I know you've answered that in the chat a little bit, but I would love to get it on video.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, we did have some criteria that we'd identified right at the beginning of our process for community education and outreach. Some of those were, you know, our VMP's entire outreach program, you know, during this public hearing process has been to reach out to underserved groups, knowing that, you know, there are the Democratic Party, for example, the Republicans that have the means and, you know, have been since probably the last redistricting cycle, you know, be preparing and doing everything they can to influence the current redistricting cycle. So we reached out to groups large and small. We wanted a diversity of groups, you know, that had geographic, you know, diversity. We wanted to make sure to focus on groups that had been the victims of gerrymandering in the past, kind of split up in the past. There are certain areas that are sort of notorious, you know, in Michigan for having been cracked and packed for partisan gain. And then there was a piece too of we wanted to, like I said, we, you know, offer subgrants. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to reach out to groups that otherwise wouldn't have the resources to, you know, meaningfully engage in the redistricting process. So we were really happy to get, you know, some of these mostly smaller groups to join our cohort of for deep engagement. And, you know, and then lastly, you know, we are part of a coalition where we coordinate closely with all of our, other statewide outreach groups. And so we're making sure all throughout the way that we're not overlapping and duplicating efforts.
Great, thank you. And then I have a question directed at Chris. Will there be a consultant mapper at map drawing public meetings to help facilitate commissioners' iterative process?
We're not sure what's going to happen. The commission has formed 2 subcommittees. One is called Budget and Finance. So they are meeting beginning, I believe, next week. We've published the dates on the league website, and I think One Virginia has those dates as well. I imagine that will be one of the pieces that they will be discussing at their meetings.
I think that's correct. And I'm going to try, the league has a great graphic with all of those meeting dates that I will put in the chat, and then I will include it in the follow-up information that goes out after this event so that everybody's got that. Those meetings will also be open to the public, just like the main commission meetings. And those subcommittees will act like working groups. And I think a lot of the real nitty-gritty logistical decisions will be made there. Okay. Oh, we have a question for Moon. Moon, can you give an example of where you've analyzed and pulled COIs together?
Sure. We've been doing that work in real time in several of the states that we have partner relationships with. So for instance, our lab is supporting the People's Maps Commission in Wisconsin, and they've had a public submission portal up for about a month now. And we've been giving them weekly digests of what the COI input looks like, where in the state it's coming from. I think that's, I hope, pretty useful because it shows them there are whole swaths of the state that they're not hearing from yet. And it tells them where they should do targeted outreach to try to make sure that they're hearing all kinds of voices from around the state. So that's one example. I'd be happy also to share contact info. I think I can do that in the chat. And if you want to see what that looks like, a COI summary, I'd be happy to share that. So folks should feel free to reach out. Oh, and here's the link to the Michigan portal.
Great, Moon, thank you. All right, thank you all. And I will include, oh, no, we got a new question, yay. Moon, you mentioned that there is such a thing as too much information. Can you list any items connected with the redistricting process that interested citizens don't necessarily have to learn about thoroughly?
Oh, great. My interpretation of that question is there's this big entry barrier because there's so much to learn. There's this fire hose of information when you're trying to get up on all the subtleties of redistricting. But I interpret the question to be, what can people do to engage without taking like a graduate course on redistricting? And my answer is, I really think that if done well, the public input process, particularly the COI piece, the communities of interest piece, it can be and should be really intensely like ground level. That is to say, you can give useful input just in the form of mapping your own neighborhood. Yeah, and I want to sort of boost Nancy's signal. Nancy Wang and VMP has some phenomenal materials. We have some materials in our lab too to try to help people feel empowered. I found that when I interview people for COI testimony, sometimes I sit down and I talk to them and I get them trying to map. One guy, I was talking to him about his neighborhood and he was like, wait, I don't want to get it wrong. Can I go look it up? And well, my answer was, what we want out of this process is how it looks to you. And what do you see as the needs when people get together and congregate? What are they talking about? What might a community meeting be about? So we really try to make the COI process very ground level and empower people to talk about the neighborhoods and regions of the state as they see them. And so I don't think that needs a kind of a master class on gerrymandering in order to sit down and think about what your community, your region, and your neighborhood looks like. That's great. Thank you. I agree. I think there's a lot of threshold anxiety when people are trying to draw maps and they want to get it right. And I think there are very few wrong answers when it comes to what your community of interest is.
I think there's a question about how big is a typical community of interest map?
Oh, great. I completely missed that. So I'm glad you saw it.
Yeah.
And
I think as Moon was saying, I think it can be as small as a few blocks. If it's just your neighborhood, that you have a common interest. It could be just very small, and you can draw that on your, paper napkin, as Moon had mentioned. But it could be as large as your entire city. For example, Lynchburg has been split into 2 different House of Delegates districts and 2 different Senate districts, whereas before 2011, they were all together in one of each. So it could be larger, but it could be very small, whatever you choose to make it.
Strongly
Okay.
agree. We also try to tell people when they draw, if they're drawing something really small so that it's maybe too small to seem relevant at the level of congressional districts, it may well be relevant at the level of House of Delegates districts or for a future county commission or city council process. So no community is too small. I completely agree.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. We're running ahead of schedule and you all have provided such great information. I really, really appreciate it. You're more than invited to stick around for the next section, but if you need to go, you're welcome to do that too. And we'll provide all of the follow-up. There's some really good information in the chat for attendees to look at, but we will also send all of that out in written form in follow-up materials, and make sure that you know how to find Nancy and Chris and Moon and their work. All right,
Thanks,
thanks so
everyone.
much.